Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Virtual Engagement Ideas Summit. And our special guest today is Demetria Bell Anderson, all the way at Marquette University in Wisconsin. How are you today?
I am doing fabulous.
I'm so lucky to have you on this program, interview series, summit. I think we've known each other for a long time through NACA and the National Association for Campus Activities.
Yes.
And you've worn many hats in that world. But I want to know right now about the workshop that you just came out of. Just before you walked into your office, you were somewhere else. What was all that about?
Well, so still here in the office.
Yeah.
We are working part-time, or not part-time, but part of the time we're virtual, working remotely from home still, as
Yeah.
we're wrapping up to start the semester. But then we're also now doing some staggered days in the office to kind of reacclimate ourselves to what that work routine looks like
Yeah.
from not at home. And today was day 2 of our graduate assistant training. So we have
Mhm.
7 grad assistants, and all of them are new to our office this year, with 6 of the 7 being first year
Wow.
graduate assistants coming in, or grad students coming into the program. So part of our training discussion today was literally just talking about expectations as professionals, as paraprofessionals working within our office. We had some really good dialogue about what to expect coming into this year, as we are all still trying to figure out the unexpected and the unknowns.
Right. I mean, it was that the whole. I mean, the big takeaway at the end was like, we don't know.
Um, Maybe I'll
Yeah.
get that feedback from them tomorrow. But
Right.
I think the biggest takeaway was do your best.
Yeah.
We're all still trying to figure this out together. I think one of the comments that our team has started to say, and we were figuring out more and more, is that we're kind of building the plane as we're trying to take off, at the
Yeah.
same
Oh, that's
time.
really yeah.
So when
That's the
we
first time I've heard that. This is in all the interviews. I love that.
Yeah,
I love it.
it's not mine. I don't
Yeah.
own
No, but I love it.
it.
I love it. I love it. I love it. We're building the plane as we're trying to take off, and that's the truth. Yeah.
Yeah, so right now, trying to make sure that they understand what is expected of them
Yeah.
as the director, and then working with their supervisors to understand what those expectations look like,
Right.
because we're really going to have to figure it out. Even though our campus is planning to reopen, we're still going to be meeting with students virtually, so we
Yeah.
have to talk
Yeah.
about what does that presence look like,
Right.
how are you presenting yourself
Right.
in the virtual world.
Right.
One of the things that I also mentioned to my team was to say, well, sometimes your presence is present enough. That's how I sign all of the birthday thank you cards, from
Yeah.
from our family and friends. But just knowing that when you're in the virtual space, you can still have that face to face. You can still do your best to make eye contact,
Yeah.
but being present and not kind of fumbling around or doing other things, because that's visible on the screen. So you want to
Very.
make
Yeah.
sure that,
Yeah.
that folks are aware that, yeah, I'm here for you.
Right. It's interesting. You just reminded me because we are to turn off notifications. Right. We go in and out of meetings, and sometimes we're busy doing something, and then so grad students are facing these challenges this year. Let's think back, like when you were a grad student. Um, like, what were some of the challenges that you faced as a grad student? And in the same question, where did you do undergrad? Where did you grad? And then what has your journey been? But then we'll get back to like, what was your challenge as a grad student?
Sure, sure. So I'm originally from Northeast Ohio,
Yeah.
and I traveled from the Cleveland area down to Greensboro, North Carolina, where I attended Bennett College for Women. So it is the nation's oldest historically Black college for women.
Yeah.
And that's where I did my Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology. I am a first generation college student, so that was a very, very interesting experience. Coming up on August 13th of 1995 is when I started my journey as a college student. And strangely enough, it just hit me August 13th of this year. I'll be leaving my daughter for her first year as a college student. So, wow, things come
Oh
full
wow.
circle.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Um, for my master's program, I went back home to Ohio and did my master's in higher education, administration, management, and leadership at the University of Akron.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, that program no longer exists, but I had a fabulous time, while I was there
Yeah.
as a graduate assistant. I worked primarily, I think my first year, my grad assistant position was as a support person, right, for the Education Foundation's Policy and Leadership Department, so where our
Mm.
program was housed. And then after my first year in that role, I was able to get an assistantship in a more student affairs functional area.
Mhm.
So I was the leadership advisor for Associated Student Government at the University of Akron.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a very interesting time. I'll
Yeah.
share. So my husband and I are high school sweethearts. And he started his undergraduate degree, full ride chemical engineering at the Ohio State University. And then when I graduated from undergrad and moved on to my master's program at the University of Akron, he transferred there. So that was a very interesting time, him being completing his undergraduate degree
Right.
and me being in the higher ed program. I actually was the student government advisor and he was student government president. And
Oh,
we
no
did,
kidding.
yeah, we did switch it in such a way so that my advising responsibilities were not for the executive branch, so that there wasn't that conflict of interest. But that's one of those little known facts.
Yeah, but then,
Yeah.
okay, so when you were at Bennett in Greensboro, he was still back in Ohio.
Yep.
Because you're high school sweethearts,
Uh-huh.
and you had long distance relationship, or were you already dating, or did you re-meet after undergrad?
Nope, we continued the relationship when I
Ah.
graduated. So I actually graduated from high school, as he likes to say, I'm the older woman. So I was a year ahead of him.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
but yeah, so
Well, that's neat. And you're coming up on an anniversary.
20 years.
That's
20
great.
years of marriage. Yes, it'll be 20
Yeah,
years of marriage.
it's exciting. And you got grown kids.
One, only one. She turned 18 in November. And I don't know, it's weird. So our kids are Brooklyn and London.
Uh-huh.
And I like to think of them not necessarily as cities, but the bridges between me and my husband. So those
Oh, wow.
are the two that complete us. And
So
we'll
is
often
and that's that Brooklyn Bridge and London Bridge, like those were the, oh, that is wonderful. I love that.
have,
I love that. Yeah, I was thinking like because if it was just cities, then you could have been like Toledo and you know. What's a funny name? Schenectady. That's a town in New York.
yeah.
It's not pretty, but London and Brooklyn are. Yeah, I love the bridge. Your children are the bridges between you two. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
That's beautiful. So I was thinking about grad school because there's so many grad students out there who go to school or they do their undergrad in close to where they grew up. Like, say you grew up near Cleveland or in Cleveland and you had access to a lot of things. There's a lot of grad students now that are moving from cities to small towns, small colleges for their first experiences, or their first job as a young professional, and thinking about their isolation out there. And maybe there are some of the folks that might watch this. This platform for you has served you well in the last 3 months in connecting your campus community. And I'm not even asking a question now. I'm just talking, right? So that's my skills as an interviewer. Let's talk about you. Yeah, yeah. Tell me about what's going on Marquette this summer and before the launch and during the launch, and what you've done from mid-March till now that's been really effective.
Yeah, so oh my gosh, it seems like just yesterday, but forever ago, right? That we were also trying to figure out, well, what is this? Is this something we need to be worried about? Actually, institutionally, when COVID really started to become a major issue,
Mhm.
was during the Big East tournament. And as that was getting started for March Madness and all of that,
Yeah.
and most of our upper administrators were on the East Coast for the tournament.
Right.
So, we're all kind of listening, paying attention, and then more and more things started to say, well, we're closing this or we're closing that. And then we got to a point where our vice president for student affairs just kind of, made an audible and said, well, if folks feel like they need to work remotely, then let's go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
And then sure enough, I want to say like a week later, that's when we got the call.
Yeah.
But our staff was fortunate because we were able to have the conversation before all of that of what does work from home look like?
Mhm.
What are the expectations? Our students, which also by design, our graduate students were also on spring break. as that was happening. So, we as a team, professional staff team, kind of, got together, huddled up and said, well, how do we want to manage what this looks like? Because at that time, the thought and expectation was that Marquette would be able to reopen after Easter break. And then
Hmm.
Easter break became not really.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now moving into the getting ready for the fall semester. So in our conversations, what I asked my team to do was to look at three different types of institutions. So Marquette is a Catholic Jesuit campus, are a part of the AJCU. So we look at our peer AJCU institutions. And I said, team, let's look at one other Jesuit campus, follow what those colleagues are doing,
Right.
take some notes, be in
Yeah.
touch, check in, that type of thing. Then I said, let's look at a school in the state of Wisconsin, because that's where we're located, and knowing that how the virus would spread or behave and some of the other things that our colleagues on other campuses in this state might also be dealing with. So let's look
Right.
at that would be the second school. And then the third school is like, we all have really good friends, folks that we've met through
Yeah.
our journeys throughout our journeys in higher education as student affairs professionals. And let's check in with our BFFs and say, hey, what are you doing? So we started with putting together a spreadsheet
Yeah.
of all of those different things, making those points of connection. Obviously started connecting with colleagues through platforms like Facebook and looking at the virtual ideas community.
Right.
There's another Facebook group, I think, Higher Ed and the Coronavirus, and then all of those other opportunities to connect with folks, just to kind of hear, well, what are people doing? Because nobody had any of the answers.
Right.
We were
Right.
able to kind of think through or process out loud, virtually or otherwise, with what others, were doing so we could best prepare.
Right.
So putting together that spreadsheet of those different ideas, those different resources. And then when we did start to move into actually working remotely, then we had the decision to make of, well, what does that look like for us as a team?
Hmm.
So we started having huddle ups. So every morning at 9:30, we would talk, just connect for like 30 minutes, all of us as a team.
Yeah.
We're able to kind of check in. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Here's some updates that may come from our Division of Student Affairs Executive Leadership Team, of which I sit on. So
Hmm.
if there are updates or things that I can share with my team, then I'm able to make sure, on a daily basis, here are those updates. What questions do you have that I can then take back to the team? So one of the other things, because we did not have the opportunity to actually, close out the school year and do some of those um, uh, ceremonial, endings or bringing the school year to a close, we decided to continue with summer programming and doing some things through outreach with our students.
Hmm.
And we don't typically do that, or we hadn't typically done those things in the past. So that meant we got to step up our social media game.
Right. Right.
And we've got to try to figure out, how do we meet students where they are? It's
Yeah.
not going to be about a whole bunch of newsletters, or it may not be about the really, really long emails, because the other part to it too is we wanted to make sure that as the university was communicating emails, we weren't oversaturating email inboxes. We wanted to make sure that we're leaving that email inbox space specifically for the university
Hmm.
updates. So we instead of our office has 6 different units. So instead of all of those units sending out their regularly scheduled email newsletters, we said, well, we're going to do one, and we're going to send it out every other week, so that anybody who's interested in all of those pieces of information
Yeah.
have that opportunity to connect in that way. And then again, just taking ideas, borrowing
Yeah.
ideas from what other colleagues were
Right.
doing to
Right.
really make sure that we're shoring that up for students.
Yeah, I mean, what you're said, your example of setting the first thing you did is let's look outward, and that's a great role modeling for all of us to not try to solve it all ourselves, right? To know that maybe somebody might be a week ahead of you in some of these conversations, or even a day, or there's some schools out in Washington State that won't open up till late September, but that's their normal schedule. So schools that are opening up mid-August are really going to be great resources for the schools on the West Coast. And then you bringing your staff together intentionally. Those weekly meetups. Can't remember what you specifically called it, but that's great. You got them to go out, go find about a bunch of stuff, come together, let's put it all together. And then the social media piece that you talked about, you encouraged your staff to get on and get involved, right? Um, did you divide and conquer, or did you just say get on there and go say hi to your students?
It was a little bit of both,
Yeah.
right? So because our office comprises, for example, sorting fraternity life is under this office umbrella.
Yeah.
Student organizations, leadership initiatives, first gen college students, our culturally based student organizations, our multicultural student council,
Yeah.
all of those students are very much a part of who we are and what we do, and understanding that their needs are all going to be a little bit different
Mhm.
in some respects. Our team really kind of said, okay, well, what do we need to know for our LGBTQ plus students, right? That's also a part of this office. How do we support those students? So my assistant director who guides that resource center actually recognized that there are some students who are not comfortable or safe being out at home. So when they were
Right.
forced to leave campus,
Yeah.
and needed to leave campus for, the purposes of COVID, there was some great intentionality that Emma did to really make sure that she could remain connected with students.
Yeah.
So instead of calling a program or marketing a program in such a way that it might read LGBTQ plus friendly, she was very intentional about what wording or language she
Right.
used, because if
Right.
students are at home and they've got non-supportive family members kind of reading over their shoulder, just walking into the room, ooh, that's a different conversation, right?
Oh, no kidding. Yeah, that's really thoughtful.
So,
Yeah.
and it was great, being able to
Right.
still connect with those students, making our staff made ourselves available, via text message. We
Right.
created a Google Voice phone number that we could call directly from, so the students would be able to also still, connect with us, if
Right.
not from
Right.
our personal phones.
Right. Yeah. I spoke with another LGBTQ speaker who talked about the campus family,
Mhm.
and going home being not always the best place, but really thoughtful. No one has spoken about like we were talking about overt inclusive events, and
Mhm.
you're saying chill inclusive events, right? So that it's not like, drag queen bingo is hard to hide, not to hide, but to make somebody at home feel safe, and connected, and still stay connected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was one of our moments of sadness, I think,
Yeah.
when our Pride Prom. So the LGBTQ plus Resource Center at Marquette is celebrating its 5th year in existence.
Hmm.
And Pride Prom, this would have been our third Pride Prom, I believe, that this
Yeah.
spring. But Emma decided, hey, we can't be in person, but we'll DJ and open a Zoom room or something like that,
Great.
and we can still, connect in those ways. So definitely utilizing even group chats, right, to
Mhm.
still be able to reach out and as much as we can connect with our students.
Right. Right. That's great. Jesuit campus,
Hmm.
social justice teaching.
Yes.
How much has that guided you and your team?
Ooh, this summer, I think quite a bit. So I'll say this: the Office of Engagement and Inclusion in 3 days. So the kickoff, I think, for this conference is the 7th, correct? So that is the first anniversary of the Office of Engagement and Inclusion as an entity on this campus. And part of the reason and rationale that our Vice President for Student Affairs,
Hmm.
Dr. Cole, wanted to do this is he really wanted to make sure that all things social justice and all things diversity, equity, and inclusion were foundationally embedded in the fabric of the entire student experience. And that's literally the area, all of those areas make up what this office is
Right.
designed to do. So literally by design, that's why we're here.
Right.
And then you fast forward, we're dealing with the COVID pandemic, and quite early on, especially in Milwaukee, where Marquette is located, and Milwaukee County, a lot of the COVID cases that were happening were
Yeah.
here. And
Right.
those cases were, as they are, I think, across the country disproportionately impacting and affecting Black and Brown communities.
Mhm.
Communities of color, for a variety of different reasons, are being extremely impacted by
Right.
COVID, not just from the standpoint of the health and safety component, but also the resource availability, the socioeconomic
Right.
availability, the
Right.
jobs and all those things that typically are going to be um, staffed by individuals of color, especially in the poorer communities.
Yeah.
And then when we add to that what has been dubbed the racial pandemic, right, and that showing itself back up in a much more resounding way with the death and murder of George Floyd, that was one of those moments where I think even before George Floyd's death, Ahmaud Arbery's passing and his
Yeah.
murder as
Right.
well. And in one of our morning huddle ups, our team is relatively diverse. One of my team members said, "So are we going to say anything on social media about, this murder?
Mhm.
And how do we support our students?" And I sat back and I said,
Mhm.
all right, this is where the rubber meets the road. This
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
where, as a social justice institution, this is our opportunity to connect, right? And this is our
Right.
opportunity to show up in those spaces for our students. So very quickly, we had a conversation about, well, what does that look like? How do we utilize our social media platform right now? Because that's the best way that we are able to connect with our students.
Yeah.
How do we now be a part of that conversation? How do we hold space for that conversation without taking over the conversation as well? So yes, it has been a very interesting summer.
Right.
In addition to social media outreach, members of our team
Right.
have had direct conversations with our student leaders from various walks of life,
Yeah.
from various
Yeah.
different student organizations, and even some individual students. I actually had one particular student or two students send me an email saying, literally, we've looked at the rules and we know that the window is closed for establishing a new student organization. But here's the constitution of the group that we want to establish that's
Yeah.
going to talk about and support social justice teachings and what have you. So it's been a pretty amazing summer, and as a student affairs professional, I am extremely proud
Yeah.
of the work that our students are doing,
Right.
even when we're not here, even when they're not all together to be a part of that conversation. They're still finding space and ways to do that. So, and I'm proud
Right.
of our team for being able to be a part of that.
Right. So you have students that were inspired by the events to step up and take a leadership role and at least create a constitution for a new club.
Absolutely.
Um, oh, that's great. When you said racial pandemic, can we talk about that? Are we talking about a pandemic of hate? Or are we talking about a pandemic of misinformation? Is that what you mean when that? But
Yes
just
to both of those and
yeah,
more.
yeah, right. And I so but at Marquette, and I don't want to generalize, and my stereotypical view of anybody who might be interested in these videos is that we have a pretty progressive group of higher ed professionals that believes that social justice is important, that believes that the virus is real. I was on the phone with a superintendent not far from you in
Okay.
Northern Illinois. He oversees a whole school system. He's a superintendent. 40% of his families think that the virus is a hoax,
Mm,
right? So that's a really tough position to be in as a leader. Imagine it, like you can put something out there on social media from your office. I think we believe that everybody that you if you say something about a virus, nobody writes back, "This is a load of baloney."
Well, and you'd be surprised. We
Okay.
actually we actually did get a phone call um,
Hmm.
from someone not affiliated with the institution. It's not an alum. He actually named the campus that he graduated from. It
Yeah.
was an older gentleman, and the email, or not the email, but the voicemail message was very accusatory.
Yeah.
It stung quite a bit
Hmm.
as it relates to, we were called radicals and we were radicalizing students' ways of thinking and so on and so forth around ideas related to inclusivity and diversity. Um, And it's just one of those things where like, okay, thank you for your feedback. We appreciate the voicemail.
Yeah,
And then we have to
interesting.
figure out how do we then engage that. But I think the other thought, and I will not speak for the university, but my understanding of higher education just in general, it's really from what my college president when I was an undergrad always said, Dr. Gloria Dean Randall Scott, who was the first Black woman to serve as president of the Girl Scouts, no less, the Girl
Mhm.
Scouts of America. What she would always say is her job and the job of the institution was not to teach us what to think, but
Mhm.
how to think. So
Mhm.
part of this, by design, as a Jesuit institution, Marquette is situated in the city of Milwaukee for a very
Yeah.
specific reason. So to
Okay.
be a part of that discourse, to be a part of kind of that disruption of regular thought. And again, we're not necessarily going to change anyone's mind, and that's not the role or the goal that we have. We want to be an extension of that thinking. I think about the time one of my former students, who's also a former student affairs colleague,
Mhm.
when I first met him, what he said to me is, well, I don't, and he's an African American male, well, I don't celebrate Black History Month. And
Mhm.
we talked, and I just listened to him talk, and I said, okay, there are some folks who feel as though that's not necessary. And there are some folks who will argue that it should be done 365 days a year. And while, yes, I agree to that, I also responded to him by saying, well, my personal and professional philosophy is that I'm not going to be responsible for your ignorance. And
Mhm.
by that, I mean two things. Number one, as an educator, it's my role and responsibility to be able to teach and share information, to be a facilitator of knowledge. So if I don't do my job, then I'm contributing to that ignorance. If
Mhm.
I do my job and I am teaching, I am sharing, I am imparting knowledge, I'm being a part of that facilitative
Mhm.
educational process, and for some reason you still choose to do something that fundamentally may be wrong or
Mhm.
may not be most appropriate, then I've done my job and therefore I am not responsible for the ignorance that continues from there.
Mhm.
So when we think about the role and the work that student affairs professionals play, especially in this time, again, I'm not going to tell you what to think, but
Mhm.
let's at least think about it, right?
Mhm. Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I got two questions on that. From what you said about you being in Milwaukee, do Jesuit institutions intentionally place themselves in central locations in order to connect with the community? And
Yes.
you're nodding yes. So that I think that's pretty darn cool. And your continual push to share information, right? That your goal is to educate, and you can lead a horse to water.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, also, I think one of the things about persistent educators is they continue to lead horses to water, right? Even and then they can choose to learn from that. Um, anyway, those are my thoughts. I just you said something about a leaf in our last conversation. You said something about a leaf, and I'm trying to remember exactly what you said, but I wrote it down,
Okay.
and I'm going to see if I
If
can
I don't
remember it too.
remember.
You said it was a leaf analogy about being prepared for change. Something.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes, 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 I remember. So Dr. Beth Triplett is the author and curator of Leadership Dots. And one of the leadership dots that I read
Yeah.
mentioned about when you're looking at house plants and the way that you know that someone needs sun is because the color that they'll turn, or the way you'll know that something needs water is again the color that they'll turn. So one might turn brown for one reason and one will turn yellow for the other reason. And then in the leadership dot she put a picture of a leaf that was both brown and yellow, and she's like, well, what are you supposed to do with that? Right.
Mhm.
So the idea, when you're talking about change, is understanding that some folks, this is me paraphrasing her fabulous words, but some folks will actually need one thing and you may not want to go in that direction because now you're battling, the other priorities. So competing priorities is part of what I take from that conversation
Mhm.
about change as well.
Yeah. Well, let's take this moment to promote Leadership Dots,
All right.
because let me tell you, it's pretty amazing. So, um, Beth Triplett, Dr. Beth Triplett, I remember the first time I went to the website, and I think it's just leadershipdots.com, right?
I think so.
So we're promoting something outside of our conversation. But I remember thinking to myself like 2 years ago, I was like, oh, I'm going to do weekly Rockstar leadership lessons, weekly, right? I was like, I bet I could come up with 52 good lessons, right? And then I stumbled upon the Leadership Dots website. And at that point, it had already been like years of daily leadership lessons. And
Okay.
if anybody wants to have just nuggets of brilliance, it's awesome. It's
Oh
awesome.
yeah.
And as somebody who really loves that stuff, like you can either be okay. So this is like as a musician. If I'm a drummer, and if I see a great drummer,
Mhm.
I can either be inspired to practice or I can hang up my drumsticks and be like, I quit.
Mhm.
Right? And so there's that moment when I went to Beth's website, Dr. Triplett's website. I was like, do I hang up my leadership drumsticks or do I get inspired by it? So it's really interesting. Who else has inspired you over the years?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
When I think just professionally, Dee West, she works over at Hiram College,
Mm-hmm.
very much a solid human, outstanding, higher education professional, just cool, calm, collected at all times.
Yeah.
And we can have some of the best conversations. And I will say some of my favorite conversations with her. She teaches a course on conspiracy theories. So
Mm-hmm.
just kind of sitting and listening, and there'll be something that randomly will show up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to call her.
Yeah.
I think about Dean or Vice President Billy Dunn. Billy works most recently at Lake Erie College,
Yeah.
again, hometown, Painesville, Ohio area, and she's a phenomenal person. She is a white female. I am a black female, and one of
Mm-hmm.
my first memories of talking with her, the book. I'm not going to name the book, but it is called The N Word.
Mm-hmm.
Utilizing the actual N word is the title of the book from written by Randall Kennedy. And we had one of the most fascinating conversations earlier in my career about
Yeah.
that. And it gave me the opportunity to really see someone who doesn't look like me, who is interested in having those conversations and is willing to be vulnerable in having those conversations. But more
Right.
importantly, in this space, especially this day and time, I knew this conversation was easily 13 or 14 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
But at this day and time, Billy showed me that there are folks who really do care and are asking questions, but not just because they want to know, but because they want to do the work. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say that again, they want to do the work. They want to be a part of the solution. They want to be in the trenches. When I think about other folks who inspire me similarly along those same lines, I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at all of the women who are members of the national leadership team, our past presidents, and being able to make some of those
Right.
critical decisions
Right.
and being able to pivot. And most of them will tell you they don't do those. They don't have those conversations or make those decisions in a vacuum,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So being able to understand how do you have people around you, or who do you invite to your boardroom table, right?
Right.
You are the chairman of your own board, who are on your board of directors. So shout out to another favorite human, Cindy Kane, Dr. Cindy Kane, and I
Yeah.
served on the board of directors together. So she is also a source of inspiration.
Right.
Um, my kids, my husband,
Yeah.
also very much sources of inspiration.
Yeah.
But I think also my students, right?
Right.
Going back to the idea or the concept behind all of this is we're living through a pandemic. I'm very much a people person, if you didn't
Yeah.
know.
Right.
So not being able to have that direct contact and those conversations enlightening and all with my students are also, very much a source of inspiration. And the thought was we would all see ourselves or our staff members, our team members in
Mm-hmm.
our morning huddle ups and different, meetings, committee meetings or whatever. But when you have an opportunity to sit screen to screen,
Mm-hmm.
right, with a
Mm-hmm.
student, it's like, oh my gosh, this is the best part of the day.
Yeah.
Because even watching them as they're losing out on the end of the school year and the uncertainty of the start of the next year, for different campuses, that was also, a piece of refreshing respite, from
Mhm.
everything that was going
Mhm.
on. Because, Alex Schmidt, she's our programming board vice president. And I had the opportunity to meet with her at least once a week. Tell me about your world. How are you doing? Those types of check-ins. And she would always say to me, well, Demetria, how's the family? Like, so you're still having those points of interaction
Yeah, yeah.
are truly inspirational, especially, in these times. The list continues, I think, to go on.
Well, I think your list is inspiring to all of us because it's just another example of how outward looking you are, right? And I think that's a great role. You're modeling behavior that we should all aspire to do. And this is what I mean by this: is that um, you mentioned a ton of people, right? So you're constantly looking for outside, uh, but you are one of the most knowledgeable people, right? But right, so because of your positions that you've held in NACA and on your campus and the things you've learned along the way, right? You are a keynote speaker, like you are somebody who can walk on stage and share everything you know. But still, you are still saying like you're still reaching out and you're grabbing the knowledge and you're acknowledging that there's sometimes when you don't have the answer,
Oh, absolutely.
right? And that's really important,
Yeah.
right? And you've affiliated with um, inclusive organizations. I mean, the school, it's your Greek affiliation is, I think, on the wall behind you, so you wear it you wear it proudly, right? And no, but that's a really great example to all of us to try to, I guess, was rub elbows with people that you respect. So
Well, and my supervisor, so Dr. Creer, Joya is the assistant vice president for student affairs.
yeah,
And
yeah.
interestingly enough, before a year ago, I didn't report to her. We were just colleague friends who kind of knew each other. We met. We actually started working at Marquette just about a month
Hmm.
apart from one another. But she was one of the first women, and specifically a woman of color that I met on campus. And now working directly under her leadership, what's really interesting is the notion that iron sharpens iron.
Hmm.
So when I was in undergrad, our school thought was, as women, my A is your A. We're all in this
Yeah.
together. So
Okay. Yeah.
understanding that thought and that notion that iron really does sharpen iron. So I'm only as good as the people next to me,
Right.
and there's always something that I can learn from someone else. And just as much as I can learn, hopefully I can teach. But just as much
Mm.
as I can teach, absolutely, there's more to
Yeah.
learn.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I have learned a lot today. I have, and I'm excited that we get to share this conversation with everyone. Um, any parting words of wisdom for the young grads out there or the young advisors who are, facing this mystery? And I know we talked about it when we started our conversation. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I'll just say, ask questions early and often.
Hmm.
I think we are all, as we're still, again, building the plane as we're trying to take off.
Yeah.
The thought is there are going to be moments that you may have to miss out on because depending on where you are working remotely or in the office,
Hmm.
other things will be going on around you, and to try to find those opportunities to center yourself, and don't feel like you have to have all the answers, because especially now, nobody has all the
Hmm.
answers.
Hmm.
Institutions are still today trying to figure out, well, will we be open in the fall?
Hmm.
What does that mean, for those campuses that aren't able to open?
Hmm.
What does that mean for staffing? Being willing to kind of step into the gap,
Hmm.
and be the brace that kind of shores up what is happening in the spaces around you. So consider what is under your locus of control.
Hmm.
Sometimes things are completely out of our control. So being able to kind of roll with the punches, as much
Yeah.
as we
Yeah.
can. So
Right.
part of the conversation with our grad assistants today was about flexibility. What does that look like?
Yeah.
Um, I would also think, and shout out to Ebony Ramsey. She's the assistant dean of students
Yeah.
at Maryville University, and one of the things, she's also the current board chair for NACA. And as I was cycling off of the board, she introduced a concept to me that I think my team is probably tired of me talking about, but understanding the need to anticipate, right? So work with a sense of anticipation. What's going to be that next question or thought that's out there? What's going to be the next decision that might need to be made, and how are you a part of that conversation? Paying attention to detail. So again, looking at the things that are within your realm of responsibility, what are the details? Where are those spaces where you yourself can be that content expert? And then understanding the urgency of that. And urgency is a very challenging thought right now because there's so many different competing priorities, because there's so many different decisions that need to be made. But again, working with a sense of anticipation, a sense of attention to detail, as well as a sense of urgency. And I think you'll be fine.
Oh, that's great. Is there something that you say to yourself, like when you're coming onto campus or you're walking down the hall or when things are crazy around you? Is there a saying? Is there a song that's in your head that is there's something that sort of moves you or centers you?
Yeah. There are two things.
Mm-hmm.
And it brings tears to my eyes. Well, actually, maybe three things, because I love music.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, I love music. And I'll say that's been probably one of the most interesting things about working from home.
Yeah.
And I was really glad to get back into my office a little bit. I share our workspace at home in our basement,
Yeah.
Anderson Industries, with my husband. So I'm so used to having music playing. I feel like there's a song for every emotion, a song for every moment in time and life or whatever. So there are two songs that I think about, and they're both by India Ari.
Uh-huh.
One of them is called Just Do You, and the other one is called Moved by You.
Yeah.
So those two songs are often places that I'll go in terms of kind of trying to recenter myself. But then the other part to it too, we talked about my kids a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
My youngest daughter a few years ago had a pretty severe asthma episode.
Mm-hmm.
And we just happened to be in Children's Hospital. And I'm, oh my gosh, the world is awful. My kid is really sick, and, so on and so forth. And then, oddly enough, there was a moment where, you get the code blue or whatever those different codes are,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like literally a light flashing. So that's all hands on deck for that other family situation. And I
Yeah.
don't know what happened to that child. I don't know, the outcome of that situation. But in that moment, and since that time now forward, my mantra is when it rains, it could always be worse.
Yeah.
So as we're walking through all of this stuff related to COVID, as we're walking through all of these different, issues and things of that nature, it
Yeah.
could always be worse. For some families,
Right.
it gets to that point of it's worse today,
Yeah.
right? It literally is worse right now in this moment. If
Yeah.
you are not in that space, recognize that you could be in that space,
Yeah.
but for the grace of God, there go I.
Yeah.
So when we think about that, no matter what the issue is, I try to always pull myself back to the center, back to the middle, just knowing it could completely be a totally different story. So we've got to
Yeah.
make the most out of the situation that we're in. And then, want to extend that same level of grace,
Yeah.
that same expectation of grace that I would hope someone would offer me. I render that onto you as well.
Yeah. Well,
That
that's
was more than two things, I think, but
no, but it's great. I mean, yes, when stuff's really hard for us, somebody else is going through a code blue,
mhm.
right? Right, you're really keeping it in perspective, being able to take a step back and say like, stuff's crazy,
Mhm.
but I'm still standing here.
And I'll tell you one of the other favorite things, one of my former students, gosh, it's probably about 15 or 16 years ago, a student, we would see him and say, "Hey, how you doing?" He was like,
Yeah.
"Well, I'm doing better than some, not as well as others," right? So again, it could completely be a totally different situation. And it's really about perspective.
Yeah.
In our meeting a little bit ago, we were talking about attitude. And my favorite part of the fish philosophy in that video is the one person is like, yeah, well, nobody, when you choose your attitude, nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to be a jerk today, right? So
Yeah.
again, how you choose to walk into spaces,
Yep.
how you choose to look at a situation, glass half full, glass half empty,
Mhm.
pessimism, optimism, all of that, that's your choice,
Yeah.
right? And things potentially, hopefully, are never truly as bad as they seem. So,
Right. Right. That's great. I mean, I don't want to stop our conversation, but I know that that you have to go. I know that I have this time timer that I use. I use it for myself. I use it for my own trying to get stuff done. Like I'm gonna do emails for 20 anyway. But thank you so much for your time today and for all your hard work. And now I feel like I should go to a Jesuit college. Like I and I also love Milwaukee. I love all the beverage opportunities of Wisconsin.
yes, oh, fair enough.
Thanks again. So, in one of these interviews over the last 2 weeks, we discovered the virtual hug.
Okay,
So this and then this.
all right.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was fun.
Yeah. Have a great evening.
I will. You do the same.